So hi, a blessed and beautiful day. This is me again, Garth Anthony Pabilan, for the second part of my discussion on global poverty. This time, we will try to talk about Peter Singer and his influential work entitled Famine, Affluence, and Morality. In this influential work of Peter Singer, he puts forth arguments fighting global poverty from a consequentialist standpoint. In sum, he argues through a series of objections and replies that those in positions of material power should donate to those in less favorable conditions in order to increase the overall utility and ultimately decrease poverty throughout the world. It can be said that Singer's consequentialism and the capability approach are similar insofar as they both more or less seek to directly reduce poverty and furthermore provide more opportunities for those who have few or none. In Peter Singer's work, there are three key points that we have to remember. Number one, it is not beyond the capacity of the richer nations to give enough assistance to reduce any further suffering to very small proportions. Second, the decisions and actions of human beings can prevent this kind of suffering. And lastly, human beings have not made the necessary decisions in addressing the issues of poverty. That's why a lot of people are still suffering and under in pain of um, poverty. Peter Singer's work started by criticizing the affluent nations for not doing enough than they should to address the economic distress suffered by many nations across the globe. Britain, for instance, has given rather more than most countries. It has to date given £14,750. For comparative purposes, Britain's share of the non-recoverable development costs of the Anglo-French Concorde project is already in excess of £275 million, and on present estimates will reach £440 million. The implication is that the British government values a supersonic transport more than 30 times as highly as it values the lives of the 9 million refugees. Australia is another country which, on per capita basis, is well up in the aid to Bengal table. Australia's aid, however, amounts to less than 1/12 of the cost of Sydney's new Opera House. The total amount given from all sources now stands at about £65 million. The estimated cost of keeping the refugees alive for 1 year is £464 million. What Peter Singer is trying to argue here is that although the affluent nations mentioned a while ago are contributing to the developmental aid, but what they are actually doing is just the bare minimum of what they can do. And as a matter of fact, what they are contributing is just the least minimum of their excess. With this, one can ask, is it morally wrong not to do enough? And we will try to answer that question later. Now, the Bengal emergency is just the latest and most acute of a series of major emergencies in various parts of the world, arising from both natural and from man-made causes. There are also many parts of the world in which people die from malnutrition and lack of food, independent of any special emergency. Neither individuals nor governments can claim to be unaware of what is happening there, and therefore all of us have the responsibility and obligation to address the suffering felt by people in living in poverty. As he continually argued, Peter Singer contended that the way people in relatively affluent countries react to a situation like that in Bengal cannot be justified. Indeed, the whole way we look at moral issues, our moral conceptual scheme, needs to be altered, and with it, the way of life that has come to be taken for granted in our society. As we will find out in the later part of his work, Singer tried to critique the limitations of duty-based ethics and present retributive moral code. We also have to notice that Peter Singer's article revolves around two major principles. Number one, suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. Peter Singer maintained that this principle is non-debatable since everyone would accept this as a general fact that no one would really consider suffering and death from poverty as a good thing. The second principle, which is the more important one, states that if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought morally to do it. For example, if I am walking past a shallow pond and see a child drowning in it, I thought to wade in and pull the child out. This will mean getting my clothes muddy, but this is insignificant, while the death of the child would presumably be a very bad thing. It only means that if preventing something bad to happen would cost you nothing significant, therefore you ought to pursue the necessary course of action. Peter Singer then preempted the possible criticism against his second principle. Number one, that it takes no account of proximity or distance, and two, that the principle makes no distinction between cases in which one is the only person who could possibly do anything and cases in which one is just one among millions in the same position. The fact that a person is physically near to us so that we have personal contact with him may make it more likely that we shall assist him, but this does not show that we ought to help him rather than another who happens to be further away. Now, the question that is being begged here is that if I am not physically near or close to someone who is feeling the pain of poverty, am I really free of any obligation? Since it would follow that those who are in close proximity to the victims are the ones who should address their misery first. As a response, Peter Singer argued that if we accept any principle of impartiality, universalizability, equality, or whatever, we cannot discriminate against someone merely because he is far away from us or we are far away from him. He also added that from the moral point of view, the development of the world into a global village has made an important, though still unrecognized, difference to our moral situation. The fact is, we are already living in a globalized era aided by sophisticated forms of technology, which enable us for a faster communication, and therefore, distance can no longer play as a barrier in helping people living in miserable conditions across the planet. Proximity issue which has been raised has become a justification for being more concerned with the poor in one's own town than with famine victims in other countries. In response to the second criticism of his second principle, Peter Singer maintained that there may be a greater need to defend the second implication of his principle, that the fact that there are millions of other people in the same position in respect to the Bengali refugees as one does not make the situation significantly different from a situation in which I am the only person who can prevent something very bad from occurring. Singer admits that there is a psychological difference between the cases. One feels less guilty about doing nothing if one can point to others similarly placed who have also done nothing. Yet this can make no real difference to our moral obligations. Should I consider that I am less obliged to pull the drowning child out of the pond if on looking around I see other people no further away than I am who have also noticed the child but are doing nothing? One has only to ask this question to see the absurdity of the view that numbers lessen obligation. It is a view that is an ideal excuse for inactivity. Unfortunately, most of the major evils, poverty, overpopulation, pollution, are problems in which everyone is almost equally involved. Peter Singer then criticized our current moral scheme, stating that the charitable man may be praised, but the man who is not charitable is not condemned. It only means that although our current moral scheme encourages acts of goodness such as giving to the poor, we fail to make those who do not do so feel guilty. A lot of rich people waste their surplus by purchasing luxurious goods, while not minding the living conditions of those who have nothing to eat. And the goal is that we should make them feel responsible and obligated to alleviate the conditions of those living in poverty. The thing is, we ought to give the money away, and it is wrong not to do so. And that ends our discussion on global poverty. See you in our next lessons. Thank you and God bless you.